The first sound he heard was not the crack of rifles or the shouts of men, but a child's voice, clear and steady as creek water after rain. "Don't cry, warrior. My mother will save you," the little girl said. Her words cut through the smoke and dust like a blade. The Apache lay trapped beneath a fallen cottonwood, his blood darkening the dry earth, his breath shallow. He had faced soldiers, hunger, and long winters. Yet nothing had prepared him for the calm promise in a child's eyes. The land around them had once been wide and free. Rolling plains stitched with mesquite and sage. Now it was broken by wagon ruts and fence posts, scars left by the march of settlers and the long reach of the frontier. The old American West was a place where law arrived late, and mercy came even later. Out here, an Apache warrior was hunted, feared, and spoken of in whispers. His name was Taza Blackfire. It carried weight among his people and dread among those who chased him. Taza had been running since dawn. The soldiers had come fast, driven by orders and old hatred, their horses foaming at the mouth. A shot had found him near the riverbank, tearing through his side. He fled into the cottonwoods, trusting the land he knew since boyhood. But fate is cruel, and a storm-loosened tree fell with a crack like thunder, pinning him to the ground. The earth pressed his chest, stealing his strength. While the noise of pursuit faded into the distance, that was when the girl appeared. Barefoot, her dark hair tied with a strip of red cloth. She did not flinch at the sight of blood or the fearsome scars on his arms. Her name was Leora Hale, and she was no more than 7 winters old. She studied him the way children study the world, with curiosity and a quiet courage that comes before fear is learned. The Apache expected a scream or a run for help. Instead, he heard a promise. "My mother knows how to heal," Leora said again, as if repeating a simple truth. She knelt and touched the bark of the fallen tree, then looked at Taza with eyes that held the color of the sky before a storm. "She helped a man once who came near death. She will help you too." Taza wanted to laugh, but pain closed his throat. He had been raised on stories of betrayal and broken treaties. He knew what settlers did to his people. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. Yet the girl stood between him and despair, small and unafraid. In that moment, the warrior felt something he had not felt since childhood. Hope, fragile and dangerous. Leora ran toward a nearby homestead, a lonely cabin set against the edge of the plains. It belonged to her mother, Alara Hale, a woman known among travelers as a healer, and among soldiers as a stubborn widow who refused to leave her land. Alara had buried her husband after a fever took him and learned to survive with her own hands. She grew herbs, mended bones, and delivered babies in the harsh light of frontier life. She had learned that pain did not choose sides. When Alara heard her daughter's words, she froze. An Apache warrior near death was not a simple matter. Helping him could bring the wrath of soldiers and neighbors alike. The old American frontier had rules written in fear. Still, she grabbed her medicine bag and followed Leora without hesitation. A mother's love and a healer's oath pulled her forward. They found Taza, pale and shaking beneath the fallen tree. Alara's eyes took in the wound, the angle of the trunk, the signs of life still clinging to him. She did not see a monster. She saw a man in need. With a strength born of resolve, she set to work, guiding Leora to fetch water and cloth. The tree would not move icily, but Alara knew the land. She used a lever of iron and wood, inch by inch lifting the weight until Taza could be dragged free. As she cleaned the wound, Taza watched her hands. They were steady, scarred from work, yet gentle. He felt the sting of herbs and the pressure of bandages. He felt the slow return of breath. Outside, the wind carried distant voices. Soldiers were still searching, their presence like a shadow creeping closer. Alara made a choice that would change all their lives. She hid Taza in a root cellar beneath the cabin, a dark, cool place smelling of earth and potatoes. She knew the risk. Harboring an Apache could mean death or worse. Yet when she looked at Leora, who stood guard at the cellar door, she understood that some choices define a person forever. Days passed in a tense quiet. Taza drifted between sleep and waking, haunted by memories of battles and losses. His people had been driven from their lands, their way of life threatened by endless expansion. He had sworn to fight, to protect what remained. Now he lay in the care of those he had been taught to fear. The old American West blurred its lines in the dim light of the cellar. Leora visited him often, bringing water and whispered stories. She told him about the hawk that nested near the cabin, which she called Iron Sky. She told him about her dreams of riding a horse across open land without fences. Taza listened, his heart heavy with the weight of a world changing too fast. He began to see that innocence could survive even here. Above ground, Ilara faced suspicion. Neighbors spoke of Apache raids and missing cattle. Soldiers questioned her, their eyes scanning her land for signs. She answered calmly, her voice steady. She had learned long ago that fear feeds on weakness. Still, each knock at the door sent a chill through her bones. Taz's strength slowly returned, but so did the danger. One night the sound of hooves thundered close and lantern light flickered through the cabin windows. The soldiers had returned, closer than ever. Taza knew that if he was found, Ilara and Leora would pay the price. Honor demanded he leave, wounded or not. Survival demanded secrecy. In the cellar, he pressed his hand to the earth and whispered a prayer to the spirits of his ancestors. He thought of his mother, who had taught him that courage is not only found in battle, sometimes it is found in restraint, in choosing a harder path. He looked at Leora, who clutched a small carved stone he had given her, as a symbol of protection. Above them, Ilara stood at the door, facing the men who carried authority and guns. The old American frontier held its breath. The soldiers asked questions that cut like knives, and Ilara answered with measured calm. The lantern light crept closer to the cellar door. Taza felt the walls closing in. The little girl's promise echoed in his mind. "Don't cry, warrior. My mother will save you." But the night was not done testing them. As boots stopped inches from the hidden door, and a hand reached for the latch, Taza realized that saving one life might cost another. The choice that followed would decide not only his fate, but the fate of a woman and a child brave enough to defy fear in a land ruled by it. The latch did not open. But the sound of fingers brushing metal was enough to make Taza's heart pound. He held his breath, feeling the damp earth beneath his palms, the low ceiling pressing close. The cellar felt smaller with every second, as if the land itself was listening. Above him, voices moved through the cabin. Boots scraping wood, the sharp smell of oil and dust drifting down through the cracks. Ilara stood straight at the doorway, her shoulders squared in a way that came from years of holding ground without weapons. The lead soldier was a tall man with a scar cutting through his brow, his eyes restless. His name was Captain Rourke Kane, a man known for never leaving a trail unfinished. He spoke of an Apache warrior wounded near the river, a dangerous man with a fire-black name. His words were calm, but his gaze searched every corner. "There's been no one here but my daughter and me," Ilara said. Her voice did not shake. "You're welcome to look, but you won't find what you're hunting." Leora stood close to her mother, her small hand gripping Ilara's skirt. She said nothing, but her eyes flicked once toward the floor, then back to the soldiers. It was a tiny movement, but one that carried weight. Taza noticed it even from below, felt it like a pulse through the ground. He closed his eyes and steadied his breath, drawing strength from memory. He remembered the old stories told by firelight, of Apaches who moved like shadows and listened to the land. His father, Stone Bear, had taught him that survival was more than skill with a blade. It was patience. It was knowing when to stand and when to fade. Taza Blackfire had earned his name in battle, but it had also been earned through restraint. Now restraint was all he had. Captain Kane stepped further into the cabin, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He glanced at the hearth, the table, the narrow hallway that led to the sleeping room. The cabin was small, honest, with no place for secrets. Yet secrets lived there all the same. Kane paused near the center of the room, his gaze lingering as if he could feel the hollow beneath his feet. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the cry of the hawk iron sky as it circled overhead. Leora looked up, comforted by the sound. She believed in signs, in the idea that the land watched over those who respected it. Her mother had taught her that healing began with listening, not only to wounds, but to the world. Cain asked Ilara about her husband, about the fever that took him, about why she stayed on land so close to danger. Each question was a test. Ilara answered with truth where it was safe and silence where it was not. She spoke of tending crops, of trading herbs with travelers, of keeping to herself. She did not speak of the man beneath her feet. The soldiers searched the perimeter, their lanterns swinging through the night. One of them, a younger man named Elias Crow, hesitated near the cellar door. He had seen too much already in his short years, too many bodies left in dust. His hand hovered near the latch, then fell away. He told himself it was nothing, just another root cellar, just another empty space below. Taza felt the moment pass like a narrow escape. Sweat cooled on his skin. He thought of his people, scattered and hunted, of his sister Dawn Runner who had vanished seasons ago. He wondered if she still lived, if she too hid beneath end floors, waiting for danger to pass. The thought tightened his chest. When the soldiers finally left, the night seemed to breathe again. Ilara closed the door and leaned against it, her strength spent in silence. Leora rushed to the cellar, tapping softly. Ilara joined her, lifting the latch and descending into the dim space. She checked Taz's wound, her touch practiced, her face drawn with worry. "They will come again," Ilara said quietly. "They always do." Taza nodded. His voice was low, rough from pain and disuse. "I will not stay long. I will not bring death to your door." Ilara met his gaze. "You did not bring this. It was already here." The days that followed were filled with careful routines. Ilara tended Taz's wound at dawn and dusk, using herbs passed down from her own mother. Leora kept watch in her own way, playing near the window, listening for hoofbeats. The cabin became a place balanced between danger and fragile peace. Taza learned pieces of their lives through whispered conversations. Ilara had come west, chasing a promise of land and freedom, only to find hardship and loss. She had learned to stand alone, to trust her own hands. Leora had grown up knowing the taste of dust and the comfort of stories. She asked Taza about his scars, about the symbols carved into his blade. He answered what he could, careful not to burden her with too much truth. In return, Taza spoke of his people's connection to the land, of songs sung to the rising sun, of a world measured not by fences but by seasons. Ilara listened, her understanding deepening. She saw the man beyond the warrior, the weight he carried. The old American frontier had painted him as an enemy. But here, in quiet moments, he was simply human. Yet danger pressed closer. Rumors spread through nearby settlements of an Apache leader hiding among the plains, of a reward promised for his capture. Captain Kane returned to the area, his patience thinning. He believed the land held answers, and he was determined to force them free. One evening, as the sky burned red with sunset, a rider approached the cabin, not in uniform, but in plain clothes. His name was Silas Crowfeather, a trader who walked the line between worlds. He spoke Apache in English, carried news like a blade concealed in cloth. Ilara greeted him with caution. She knew that information was a currency more dangerous than gold. Silas warned her of patrols tightening, of informants eager to earn favor. He glanced at Leora, then lowered his voice. "They are hunting a man called Blackfire," he said. "They believe he is wounded and close." Ilara felt the weight of the words settle in her bones. She thanked Silas and sent him on his way, her mind racing. That night, she sat awake long after Leora slept, listening to the wind and the distant howl of coyotes. She wondered how long she could keep holding the line. In the cellar, Taza sensed the shift in the air. He knew time was running thin. His strength had not fully returned, and the land beyond the cabin crawled with danger. Still he prepared himself, checking his blade, steadying his thoughts. He whispered to the spirits, asking not for safety, but for clarity. Leora descended quietly, bringing him a small bundle of dried herbs tied with red cloth. "For when you go," she said. Her voice carried sadness she did not fully understand. Taza took the bundle, his hand closing gently over hers. "You are brave, little hawk," he said, "braver than many warriors." Above them, Ilara stared into the dark, torn between duty and fear. She had crossed an unseen line when she chose to help Taza Blackfire. There was no turning back now. As the night deepened and distant hooves echoed once more across the plains, the fragile peace around the cabin began to crack. The land watched, waiting for the next choice, knowing that when it came, nothing would remain the same. The next morning broke with a hard wind that bent the grass low and carried dust across the plains. Ilara felt it before she saw it, the sense that the land itself was uneasy. She moved through her chores with care, listening for sounds that did not belong. Leora stayed close, quieter than usual, her eyes tracking every shadow. Below the floor, Taza Blackfire sat awake, senses sharp, despite the weakness that still lingered in his body. He could feel the frontier tightening around them. The old American West had a way of closing in when blood and fear mixed. Taza thought of Captain Rourke Kane, a man shaped by rules and iron resolve. Kane did not hunt for glory alone. He hunted to impose order, to prove that the land could be tamed. To him, Taza was not a man, but a symbol that refused to die. From the hill east of the cabin, Kane studied the land through narrowed eyes. Smoke from Ilara's chimney rose straight into the sky, to calm for a place so close to danger. Kane trusted patterns more than people. He had lost men to ambush and silence, and each loss hardened him. He believed the wounded Apache was near, and belief was often enough to keep him moving. With Kane rode Elias Crow, the younger soldier whose doubts had grown heavier with each passing mile. Elias had joined the patrol chasing purpose and pay, but the frontier had given him only questions. He remembered the look in Ilara's eyes, steady and unbroken. He wondered what kind of woman stood alone against fear without flinching. Back at the cabin, Ilara prepared herbs while her thoughts churned. She knew that silence could no longer protect them. The longer Taza stayed, the greater the risk. Yet sending him out wounded felt like signing his death. She was caught between mercy and survival. A place the frontier forced many into, but never forgave. Taza listened to the sounds above, reading the rhythm of the house like a map. He thought of his people, scattered and hunted, of Dawn Runner whose laughter still echoed in his memory. He carried guilt like a second skin. Every place he stayed became a target. Every kindness offered to him turned dangerous. He wondered if the spirits tested him through Ilara and Leora, asking how much others should pay for his survival. Leora sensed the weight pressing on the adults around her. She sat by the window, carving small shapes into a piece of soft wood with a dull blade her mother allowed her to use. She carved a hawk, wings spread wide. In her mind, Iron Sky never fell, never feared fences or guns. She wished people could be more like birds. That afternoon, Silas Crowfeather returned, his arrival quiet but urgent. He carried news that settled heavy in the air. Kane had questioned nearby settlers, tightening his circle. A reward had been spoken of openly now. Greed mixed with fear made neighbors unpredictable. Silas warned Ilara that not all threats wore uniforms. Ilara thanked him, her jaw set. She asked him to spread word that she was alone and struggling, that sickness had kept her inside. Silas agreed, though his eyes held doubt. Lies traveled fast, but truth traveled faster in a land hungry for it. As night fell, storm gathered far off, lightning flickering along the horizon. Taza felt the change in the air, and new storms could be cover or curse. He spoke with Ilara in low voices, discussing paths through the hills, timing, risks. Each option carried danger. The land that once protected him now crawled with eyes. Captain Kane set his camp that night closer than before. He watched the storm and thought of unfinished work. He believed pressure broke lies. He ordered his men to rotate watches, to listen as much as look. He told Elias Crow to keep an eye on the cabin at first light. Elias obeyed, though unease gnawed him. He remembered his own mother, her hands rough from work, her eyes tired but kind. He imagined her standing alone before armed men and felt something twist inside his chest. The Apache warrior was an enemy by order, but the woman and child were not. In the cellar, Taza sharpened his blade with slow care. Each stroke was measured, respectful. He did not plan to fight unless forced. He knew that blood spilled here would stain more than the ground. He prayed instead for a path unseen. Leora crept down to him, bringing a small pouch of dried berries. "For strength," she whispered. Taza smiled faintly and accepted the gift. He told her a story of his people, of a warrior who survived by listening when others charged forward. Leora listened, wide-eyed, carrying the lesson deeper than words. Ilara stood at the table above, her hands resting on the wood. She felt torn in ways she had never known. Helping Taza had awakened something in her, a refusal to accept the easy cruelty of the world. But courage carried cost, and the frontier collected its debts without mercy. At dawn, Cain moved. His men approached the cabin not as raiders but as guests, their posture calm, their smiles thin. Cain knocked, his voice polite. Ilara opened the door, meeting him without fear. Leora stood behind her, silent. Cain spoke of protection, of cooperation, of keeping families safe. His words were smooth, practiced. Ilara listened, offering nothing more than courtesy. Cain's eyes scanned the room again, his instincts screaming that something was hidden just beyond reach. Below them, Taza felt the weight of footsteps overhead. He pressed his palm to the earth, grounding himself. He thought of Dawn Runner, of Stone Bear, of the songs sung to steady trembling hearts. He knew this moment would shape many lives. Elias lingered near the door. His gaze shifting between Cain and Ilara, he noticed Leora's tight grip on her mother's sleeve, the way her eyes flicked toward the floor, despite her effort to stay still. Doubt sharpened into something closer to resolve. The storm broke then, rain pounding the roof, thunder rolling across the plains. The sound swallowed voices, blurred edges. Cain paused, listening, weighing options. The land itself seemed to challenge him, daring him to push further, as rain fell hard and steady. Every person held their breath for a different reason. Ilara prayed the storm would buy time. Taza prepared for flight or sacrifice. Leora believed an iron sky watching from above. Cain sensed the truth slipping just out of reach, and Elias stood at the edge of a choice that would define who he would become. The frontier had drawn its lines, and all of them stood balanced on the edge, knowing that when the storm passed, nothing would remain hidden for long. The rain did not ease with the passing hours. It soaked the plains, turning dust to mud and washing old tracks into the earth. Ilara moved quietly through the cabin, her senses tuned to every sound outside. The storm gave cover, but it also brought uncertainty. In the old American frontier, storms could hide mercy or magnify danger. Captain Rourke Cain kept his men close despite the weather. He believed pressure worked best when patience wore thin. From beneath his hat, his eyes stayed fixed on the cabin, on the woman who refused to bend. Cain had faced many enemies, but Ilara Hale troubled him in ways he could not name. She was not afraid, and that made her dangerous. Below the floor, Taza Blackfire felt the rain through the soil, cool and steady. His strength had returned enough to stand without shaking, though pain still flared when he moved too fast. He knew time had narrowed. The longer he stayed, the more lives were pulled into his shadow. Honor whispered that he should leave. Survival argued for waiting. He balanced both like blades in his hands. Leora sat near the hearth, tracing patterns in ash with her finger. She listened to the rain and imagined it carrying prayers to the sky. Iron Sky's cry echoed faintly through the storm. Sharp and proud, she held on to that sound as proof that the world still held good things. That night, Silas Crowfeather arrived once more, soaked and breathless. He spoke of settlers riding with Cain now, men driven by reward and fear rather than duty. The frontier was shifting from quiet tension to open threat. Ilara understood what that meant. Once neighbors chose sides, there would be no safe ground left. She descended into the cellar with a lantern, her face set with resolve. Taza rose to meet her, reading the truth in her eyes before she spoke. They talked in low voices about paths through the hills, about a canyon hidden by thick brush where horses struggled to follow. It was a dangerous route, but one Cain would not expect. If I leave tonight, they will follow, Taza said. If I stay, they will search harder. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her fear against her faith. Then we choose the path that gives you a chance, she said. And we trust the land. Leora insisted on helping, packing herbs and dried food into a small bundle. She hugged Taza tightly, her arms fierce despite her size. You promised to survive, she said. Taza nodded, swallowing the ache in his chest. Above them, Elias Crow watched the cabin through sheets of rain. Doubt had grown into certainty. He could no longer pretend he did not see what was happening. The frontier had taught him that orders and justice did not always walk together. As thunder rolled, he made a choice that would alter his path forever. Near dawn. The storm weakened, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Mist clung to the ground, blurring edges and swallowing sound. Ilara moved first, opening the cellar door and guiding Taza up into the dim light. He stood tall despite his wounds, his presence filling the small space. For a moment the cabin held all three of them, bound by a decision made without words. They waited for the right moment. Kane's camp lay quiet, men weary from the storm. Horses stamped and snorted softly. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias Crow approached Kane with news he shaped carefully, suggesting that tracks near the river had been washed away and that the Apache might have fled east. Kane listened, suspicion flickering, but exhaustion dulled his edge. He ordered a small patrol to check the river, leaving fewer eyes on the cabin. That was the opening. Ilara led Taza out the back, keeping to the shadow of the cottonwoods. Leora watched from the doorway, her small hand raised in silent farewell. Taza touched his chest in the Apache sign of respect, then vanished into the mist. For a brief moment, hope stirred. But the frontier rarely allowed clean escapes. A settler named Bram Ironjaw spotted movement near the trees. Fear and greed sharpened his voice as he shouted, breaking the fragile quiet. Horses stirred. Kane turned, his instincts flaring back to life. The chase did not erupt in gunfire, but in shouted orders and pounding hooves. Taza ran with the land, not against it, slipping through brush and uneven ground. Pain flared, but he pushed on, driven by memory and promise. He reached the canyon's edge as dawn's first light touched the sky. Behind him, Kane closed in, his resolve renewed. He did not intend to lose this hunt. The canyon narrowed, forcing choices. Taza paused, listening, feeling the earth beneath his feet. He trusted the path Alara had described, though it meant descending into shadow. Back at the cabin, Alara felt the distance like a pulled thread. She held Leora close, as shouts echoed faintly across the plains. She did not know how the chase would end, only that she had done what she could. Her heart pounded with fear and fierce hope intertwined. Elias Crow rode with the patrol at the river, his mind elsewhere. He knew Kane would soon realize the truth. When that moment came, Elias would have to stand on the side he had already chosen. He prepared himself for whatever that would cost. In the canyon, Taza moved carefully, using the slick rock and narrow ledges to his advantage. The land whispered warnings and guidance. He felt closer to his people here, closer to the spirits who had shaped him. Yet Kane was relentless, his presence a weight pressing forward. As the sun rose higher, casting light into places long held by shadow, the distance between hunter and hunted shrank. Taza reached the hidden bend where the canyon opened into thick brush. He could see freedom just beyond, but also felt the pull of fate tightening. On the ridge above, Kane raised his hand, signaling his men to slow. He studied the canyon, sensing the trap not yet sprung. He smiled thinly, confident that patience would win the day. Far away, Leora watched iron sky circle against the brightening sky. She whispered a prayer she had made up herself, one that asked not for victory but for mercy. The land listened, as it always did. Every step now carried weight. Every breath held consequence. The chase had drawn all of them toward a single moment, one where courage, mercy, and choice would collide. The old American frontier stood ready to witness what would come next, knowing that whatever happened in that canyon would echo far beyond its walls. The canyon held its breath as Taza Blackfire stepped into the narrow bend, where stone walls rose like silent judges. Water dripped from the rocks, steady and calm, as if the land itself refused to hurry. He could hear Captain Rourke Kane and his men closing in, boots scraping stone, voices low but certain. The hunt had reached its heart, and there was no more room to run. Taza turned and faced them. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, not as prey but as a warrior who had already survived more than most men ever would. The morning light touched his face, revealing the scars that told stories older than this chase. Kane slowed when he saw him standing there, alone, not begging, not hiding. "It ends here," Kane said, his voice carrying authority and fatigue. "You are wounded and surrounded. Lay down your blade." Taza looked past him at the land beyond, at the path that might still offer escape if blood were spilled. He thought of Alara Hale standing alone in her cabin, of Leora's small arms wrapped around him, of the promise spoken by a child who believed mercy could exist in a hard world. He lowered his blade slightly, not in surrender, but in peace. Before Kane could speak again, another voice cut through the canyon air. "Enough." Elias Crow rode forward, his horse nervous but steady. He dismounted and stood between Kane and Taza, his hands empty. The men behind him murmured in confusion. Kane's eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across his face. "This man is wounded," Elias said. "Was given shelter by a healer and a child. No attack was planned. No harm was done." Kane stared at him, anger rising. "Step aside," he ordered. "You forget yourself." Elias did not move. "No," he said quietly. "I remember myself." The silence that followed was heavy. Kane looked from Elias to Taza, then to the canyon walls, calculating. He had built his life on order, on clear lines between enemy and ally. Yet here, the lines blurred in a way he could not control. Far from the canyon, Alara Hale stood on the rise behind her cabin, watching the distant land with eyes that refused to look away. Leora stood beside her, clutching the small hawk carving. The wind lifted her hair as she whispered the same words she had spoken before. "My mother will save you." Back in the canyon, Kane exhaled slowly. He saw the truth he had avoided. The Apache warrior before him was not leading a raid. He was not hiding an army. He was a man who had been hunted too long. Kane weighed the cost of pushing forward against the cost of stepping back. He raised his hand, signaling his men to lower their weapons. "This ends now," he said, his voice hard but controlled. "The land has taken enough." Taza met his gaze, respect flickering between them. Not friendship, but understanding. Kane turned away first, mounting his horse. He did not look back as he gave the order to withdraw. When the soldiers left, the canyon felt wider, lighter. Elias approached Taza, his expression uncertain but resolute. "Go," he said, "before someone changes their mind." Taza nodded once, a warrior's thanks. He disappeared into the brush, moving with the land, leaving no trace but memory. Days passed. The frontier shifted again, as it always did. Word spread quietly that the hunt for Blackfire had ended without blood. Some scoffed, others felt relief they could not name. Captain Kane moved his patrol elsewhere, his certainty cracked but not broken. Elias Crow resigned his post soon after, choosing a path less bound by orders and more guided by conscience. Taza traveled south, finding others of his people who had taken refuge in hidden valleys. Among them was Dawn Runner, alive and strong, her spirit unbroken. Their reunion was quiet, filled with tears and shared silence. Together they began to rebuild what had been scattered, carrying stories of kindness found where none was expected. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Taza left a small bundle near Alara's cabin, unseen. Inside were beads carved with Apache symbols of protection and gratitude. Alara found them at dawn and understood. She pressed them to her chest, feeling a peace she had not known in years. Life at the cabin changed, but it did not grow smaller. Travelers came seeking Alara's healing hands, drawn by stories of a woman who stood firm against fear. Leora grew taller, her laughter carrying farther across the plains. She kept the hawk carving on her windowsill, a reminder that courage could begin in small voices. One day, Iron Sky nested closer to the cabin than ever before. Leora took it as a sign, smiling up at the sky. Lara watched her daughter and thought of the land, how it tested and taught those who listened. Far away, Taza Blackfire stood on a ridge at dawn, watching the same sun rise over open land. He thought of the little girl's promise and the woman who had kept it. He knew the frontier would remain harsh, filled with struggle and loss, but he also knew now that mercy could cross even the deepest divides. The old American West moved on, shaped by choices both cruel and kind. Some were remembered in history, others only in hearts. The story of a warrior, a healer, and a child became one of those quiet truths that never faded. In the end, no victory was claimed by force alone. It was claimed by courage, by restraint, and by the belief that saving one life could change many. And on the wide plains where fear once ruled, a softer legacy took root, carried by wind, by memory, and by hope.